welcome to RPG Community College. I hope y'all are having as much fun in the Scourge League as I am. And a large part of my enjoyment of the league is just coming from how good this build actually is. It just has the AoE clear and the survivability to just really excel at Scourge, and it just feels so good to be interacting with the league mechanic. Like, even before they buffed the Scourge League drops, it was already feeling amazing to me. Like, I easily made a couple exalts just selling the raw tainted currency drops that were all coming out of the Scourges that I was doing. Like, this build can just sit in a 100 stat Corruption Scourge all day, no problems, and I've never ever really felt like I was in an extreme amount of danger, even when the Corruption stacks were getting really high. I am very happy with my choice of build this league. This is not to say I got everything right, though. There definitely has been some improvements and optimizations that I've made, and if you'd give me a moment of your time, I would like to share them with you. Also, down in the description, I'll leave a link to my character profile so that you can load the character up in the Path of Building yourself and play around with things and look at stuff and just see like what gear I'm using now and just how my setup's changed. But the first thing I'd like to talk about is getting Spectres into the build. We basically just do this so that we can add some monsters with very large amounts of life into the pool of monsters that our Desecrate gem can select to spawn. That way, when we explode those corpses with Detonate Dead, it'll deal a lot more damage, because the more life the corpse has, the more damage Detonate Dead's going to do. I knew that there used to be some monsters that you could get from Harvest that had very large amounts of life, but that was nerfed and taken away. And then there's also some monsters that you can get from Delve that have very large amounts of life, but you can only get them from depth 200 and below, and that's not really viable for a starter build. But what I didn't know about is that there is actually some pretty accessible monsters that you can pull out of Heist that have massive amounts of HP. And I actually didn't even learn about this until yesterday, so I've been playing this build the whole time without even using these things. And these mobs are called Rusty Crushers and Auto Enforcers. And you find these in the Tunnels contracts for Heist. You can just go to Wakano the Barber and just search his inventory for Tunnels contracts, and sometimes they'll pop up there. Or you might just have some lying around in your heist locker if you're not running all your heists. But these mobs have absolutely massive amounts of HP, and it is definitely worth just running around with them as Spectres, and it'll help out that single target damage quite a bit. But eventually you are going to want to delve down to 200 depth and look for Primeval Fortresses, and those are going to spawn monsters called Stone Skin Flayers and Lithomancers. Those are going to have more life, and those are the best Spectres that you could possibly use in order to spawn high health mobs with Desecrate. I'm currently still working on this, but I should have it done pretty soon. I'm almost there. Next I want to talk about Divine Shield. Because this is a new keystone, there's really not that much information out there about it, or opinions. But from my experience, if you build around this is a very powerful keystone, and makes playing hybrid armor energy shield builds feel very, very good. I have had next to no problems with energy shield regen, and I don't even take Essence Glutton in the Necromancer Ascendancy. I absolutely feel like I do not need it. I would much rather invest the skill points into my tree than having to spend those 2 Ascendancy points on sustaining my ES. Besides taking Divine Shield, the only other thing I needed to grab on the skill tree was 1 small energy shield leech node, and then that was it. After that, sustaining my ES really wasn't a problem, and it started to feel really, really good. I also have a Suffix Craft on my belt that gives me 150 ES regen when I'm near a rare or unique enemy. I didn't really feel like I needed this until I started hitting like high tier red maps and I started actually doing some rippy content. So not having this at first is okay, but it is something you're going to want to get eventually. But I'd also like to talk about my current gem setup, and also talk a little bit about my gear too. Probably a good place to start would be talking a little bit more about Raised Spectre and just how to maintain your Spectres. Like for Detonate Dead, you don't really care if your Spectres die. All you need to do to get these monsters into your pool of monsters that Desecrate can spawn is you just need the Spectres to get into the zone that you're in. So if your Spectres die while you're mapping, it's not really a big deal. all you gotta do is just remember to raise them back up after you finish the map. And that's really it when it comes to maintaining your specters. And if you do lose them, it's not that hard to get them back, but it is a little annoying. But you should make sure to keep some spare tunnels contracts just lying around. And one kind of important thing to kind of just make the playstyle of Detonate Dead feel really smooth while you're mapping is to automate the casting of Bone Offering. When I'm in a map, all I really want to think about is what I have to explode next. So having to constantly worry about just keeping Bone Offering up is it just ain't really that fun. And half the time honestly, I just forget to cast it, and I end up dying because of it. So I just put in a cast when damage taken setup, and the build feels like 10 times smoother to play than if I'm just casting Bone Offering myself. The important thing to know about this is that cast when damage taken casts gems in a clockwise formation, so you need to put Desecrate before Bone Offering in your gem links, and that way the Desecrate will cast before the Bone Offering, and it will guarantee that you have corpses on the ground for Bone Offering to absorb. I also put my Wave of Conviction in here, just because when I'm fighting bosses, I want to get hit for many reasons, but because I'm doing this, I'm going to be taking damage. Cast when damage taken is going to proc, it's going to proc Bone Offering, and it's going to proc Wave of Conviction, which just increases my damage, and it's just a nice little quality of life thing, and it's just another thing I don't really have to worry about casting myself. And another cool little thing I do is, I was using Molten Shell with cast when damage taken as well. I ended up just putting Molten Shell into my left click instead of move only. So now when I'm just moving around, I'm always just constantly casting Molten Shell whenever it's off cooldown. And this is going to save you a gem slot as well. So I can put Combustion into my shield, which the Surrender Shield grants a level 30 Reckoning skill, which if we support that with Combustion, we can use it to ignite enemies and give them minus 10% fire resistance, which is a pretty neat trick. But to do this, you're going to need some way of adding flat fire damage to your attacks. I just do that with a Mastercraft on my ring that just adds generic flat fire damage. And this will add the fire damage to our Detonate Dead and to our attacks with Reckoning. That's pretty much it when it comes to gems. I didn't really change that much. When it comes to my gear though, I'd have to say I'm probably about 10 exalts invested into it so far, which for how much I'm playing really isn't that much, but I understand for some people that's quite a bit, especially for this stage in the league. But the most important upgrades I've gotten so far is the Skin of the Lords chest piece I got here. And this isn't that expensive. Looking on PoE trade, they go for 50 to 100 C. Problem is just they're in short supply, and it's hard to find this exact one that I have. And because the sockets can't be modified on these, you need to find one with very specific colors. And you also need to find one with a very specific keystone. And having Mind Over Matter here on this chest actually saves me 2 passive points. And I wouldn't want to use something like a Cloak of Defiance, because Cloak of Defiance doesn't have 100% increased global defenses on it. And that stat is very useful for scaling our armor up. With a Cloak of Defiance, you would have nowhere near as much armor as I have. But you don't need to get a 4 blue, 1 green, 1 red Skin of the Lords. You can replace Conk Effect with Hypothermia, and you don't deal that much less damage. But your build overall would be better because you have a Skin of the Lords. And the +2 to level socket of gems on here doesn't just scale the levels of Detonate Dead, it also scales the levels of the support gems. So you're not just increasing the spell damage portion of Detonate Dead, you're also scaling the corpse explosion portion, because you're giving gem levels to elemental focus and concentrated effect, which does help out a little bit. And another really important item that I would focus on getting is the Surrender Shield. This shield is actually just insane for our build. This is quite a bit more expensive, and I'm surprised at looking at PoE trade, there's so few available, but it's a good shield, and I'm not surprised that people are using it. This is where we get most of the armor from our gear right here. If you look on the rest of my gear, pretty much none of it has any armor whatsoever. And I'm able to do this because the Surrender is giving us 1500 armor if we block recently, which we have max block, so that's basically all the time. We're also recovering 250 life when we block, which is a great increase to our survivability. And like I said when I was talking about the gems, we get to use the Reckoning skill to reduce resistances. So between the shield and the chest piece, these are the 2 major items that I would focus on getting first. Another thing that you should also consider is because we get so much all resistance from our skill tree and our ascendancy, it makes it really easy to get chaos resistance on a lot of our gear. So capping your chaos resistance shouldn't be a problem, and I highly recommend doing that. And pretty much all the rest of our gear is rare, so getting some chaos rolls on a lot of it shouldn't really be a problem. Another really important part of my gear are the flasks. They added a new mod for flasks in this patch, so that makes it so that when you get hit, you gain charges. And this is actually just insane. It's one of those things that's so good, I can't believe they put it in the game. When I'm mapping, I basically never run out of my flasks. They're always up. With this build, I'm getting hit all the time, so my flasks are just constantly filling up. And then when you automate them with instilling orbs, the only time you're ever going to need to use flasks is when you need to use a life flask. And even when you're fighting bosses, you just have enough defense to tank most of the attacks. So during most boss fights, I actually have my flasks up. Like, obviously, there's some bosses where you really just don't want to be getting hit, but for the most part, these flasks are pretty reliable, and they're up in almost every situation. I think that about covers everything, though, so I'm going to end the video right here. But if you'd like to continue your education, enrollment here is free. Just hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two. I wish you the best of luck in all of your endeavors, and hope to see you again soon.